The definition of a blooper is an embarrassing error. Now, I'm not sure that all of the bloopers I'm going to show you today are embarrassing, but generally bloopers tend to happen on the paddock near the road, or they end up on Twitter, which is probably just as bad. My name is Bindi Isbister. I'm a research scientist with Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development. Today I'm going to share with you some lessons we've learnt from soil amelioration bloopers as part of our DPIRD and GRDC soils projects. In 5 minutes I don't have time for all the solutions, but do give me a call later and we can have a chat about them. So there are 3 key things that I want you to remember from today. The first one is know your soil properties in 10 centimetre increments and across the paddock. The second one is ameliorate to the conditions, not to the calendar. And the third one is if in doubt, leave it out. So, what are some of these bloopers? Moldboarding and spading dry isn't as good as wet. One, because the machine doesn't work as well and you don't get the best inversion of soil. And 2, you run the risk of plant establishment issues, particularly if you start ploughing when conditions are marginally moist. You can then get uneven germination across the paddock. The risk of erosion is also higher in autumn if you plough in autumn, and you can see from the photo here the difference between what was ploughed and what was unploughed in the background. Don't plough too late in the season. So ploughing and ameliorating in fallows is a good idea because it gives the soil time to settle and be ready for next year, reducing plant establishment problems. But as one grower found when he moldboard ploughed and established a cover crop in October, that the poorer sands actually didn't establish well, leaving big bare patches. Now, in hindsight, he should have ploughed earlier in July when the soils were wetter, or perhaps he should have actually left those poor patches out. Deep ripping calcareous earth leaves a cloddy surface. In these pictures you can see the result of deep ripping in autumn last year when the soil was very dry. So in actual fact it was too dry to get a good ripping depth, and particularly using the topsoil slotting plates, and once they took the plates off they were actually only able to get into the ground up to 30 centimetres in 2 passes. This brought the soil up really cloddy, that impacted plant establishment, and at the end of the day cost them a lot of money for no yield benefit. It can also be too wet for ripping. So if it's too wet, you'll notice when you dig behind the ripper you'll see slots rather than the soil shatter. If you can roll a soil sausage, there's actually no point in ripping this soil because you're not going to do the job that you need. Bloopers commonly occur where the treatment is not applicable for all soil types in a paddock. So this is particularly a problem the further south you go, where you tend to get duplex soils that vary in both depth and also vary across the paddock. For example, delving duplex soils can bring up too much clay and it may actually be toxic. So what we're looking at here is a paddock that was delved in 2009. That in the paddock the depth to duplex range from 60 centimetres to 10 centimetres, and unfortunately in the shallow duplex it actually brought some of the toxic sodic clay that dispersed and caused a problem with plant establishment. 10 years after treatment you can actually still see in certain years a penalty of the delving. However, the penalty actually wasn't across the whole paddock, so it can be just in particular soil types. So it's really important that you understand the paddock variability across your paddock. As you can see, there's a whole range of different bloopers here, and they all do have some solutions and way to avoid them. It's particularly important to know your soil properties to depth in 10 centimetre increments, so you understand exactly what are the soil properties and what are the constraints you're targeting, so that you can choose the right amelioration method. It's also important to understand how that soil types vary across the paddock, because it may be in some paddocks that one amelioration treatment won't be appropriate for the other. It's important to ameliorate to the conditions, not the calendar. So a lot of the strategic tillage does work better when wet, and there is an increased risk of ploughing and ripping in autumn where there's not good stubble cover. If in doubt, leave it out. It's really important when you're doing soil amelioration that you hop out of the tractor and actually have a look at the result that you're leaving. And perhaps you might need to make some adjustments to the machine you're using, or look at different treatment options before you go ahead. Even leave a trial strip so that you can then evaluate it down the season, because there are some soil amelioration bloopers that can be hard to fix.